Memory, fantasy, and time often melt into changing patterns as varied as those of a child's kaleidoscope. Reality and myth are crumbled together with the pestle of time in the mortar of aging. And for the aged themselves, the process is filled with special pain. This program concerns itself with the aged. Who are they? They are people like all of us. They are educated and they are simple. They are wealthy and they are on welfare. They are part of life and they are isolated. They are well and they are desperately ill. They are productive and they are dependent. They are warm and they are mean. They give of themselves to others and they withhold themselves totally from the world. But most of all, they are human. The older American has nearly 20 million individual faces, and on each, the 20th century has drawn the lines of its progress and its troubles, its achievements and its failures, lines from work, success, bountiful production, and amazing technical progress. These are some of the faces of the older American. Behind them are the brains, the strength, and the weaknesses of men and women who have helped bring America into the jet and space ages. The elderly have the potential for qualities of human reflection and observation, which can only come from having lived an entire lifespan.
I started in the picture business 63 years ago in New Orleans, see? And I was the first man to handle talking pictures for Warner Brothers. And I took a print of The Jazz Singer with Al Jolson to every large city in the United States and screened The Jazz Singer for the better exhibitors that had put in sound, because half of the theaters in the whole territories had no sound. Everything was silent. And we screened this picture, and we then started selling sound equipment. We found by that time that talkies was here to stay. When we first started out, everybody said it's going to be a passing fancy. Nobody will want to see those things. But then we developed, I say Warner Brothers, developed sound on film, put on safety film. All film today that play in theaters are absolutely safety. And after that, it was history, because we made everything talk. We made everything. We had a man that played the accordion of vaudeville act. And he would come out and say, "What do you want me to play?" to the audience. And they would mention 3 or 4 songs that they liked. Well, the guy that could holler the loudest was the fellow that was waiting for us. He was sitting in the left aisle. And he says, "Play whatever the popular number was then, see?" And they'd play it. And the audience would say, "How in the world can that man sit in the audience, talk to that man on the screen, and play the number that he wants him to play?" Now this guy would stand there and play that thing, and about 6 or 8 minutes later, this man gets up and walks on the right side of the theater, changes his voice. He sits down. "Any number that you want me to play, I'll be glad to play it." This is the same fellow hollers, "Play so-and-so." So he hollers back, "Jolson, I'll play it and I'll sing with you if you want me to." Now they say, "How in the world can that man talk to that fella in the screen, and that screen can answer him?" Nobody could figure it out. So that was the start of talking pictures.
There can be no composite picture drawn of the older American, but we do know these facts about him. 81% of those over 65 are fully ambulatory and move independently on their own. 95% live in the community. At any one time, only 5% are in nursing homes, chronic disease hospitals, and other institutions. An increased concern for the welfare of the elderly person is a characteristic of our time. The prolonging of life has resulted from scientific advances in sanitation, immunization, and from improved techniques of medical care. The advances have produced a radical alteration in the age distribution of our population and an increase of older people in our midst. Retirement is earlier, and fewer babies are being born each year. The population of the elderly could increase to 40 million over the next 20 years. Old age is no longer a few odd golden years, but nearly 1/3 of a lifetime. When does one become aged? The aged are usually thought of as people who have lived long enough to be classified by the census and the public at large as old because they've reached 65 or more years of age. This is, however, the only absolute they have in common. What do we mean by aged? A striking example of the concept of old age is given by these youngsters.
At old age is like a senior citizen, like your grandparents or something, doing something to you that's nice. Because they're growing old and some things they can't really do. Old people which can't do much and can't do exercise, and a lot of times they can't do much work. They can only do easy work, and they always nice to you. And if you want them to help you with something, they always try to.
We all heard very many interesting observations about what old means to young people. And I think basically we all have to be concerned about the problem, because we all know that eventually, someday, even though it's in the distant future in some cases, why someday we're all going to be old. And I think that basically the thing that's so very important as far as the treatment of older people is the fact that you must treat them with a great deal of respect, a great deal of dignity, and also a great deal of love. They're much older in comparison to what these young people are as we sit here together today, but the one thing that will make older people younger fast as anything is the relationship that they could enjoy with young people. I think that makes them much younger. I think they reflect on the years gone by where they were very much the same age, interested in the same things, were interested in being able to do the same things that you're able to do now, and as a result it makes them very melancholy and makes them feel very good about the fact that their association with young people very obviously makes them feel much younger. I'm in a great profession. In the football business, I think it's the very finest business in the world, but one of the great things that motivates me as far as this business is concerned, because we're always, number one, in the people's business, but it helps keep me very young, my association with the young people. And as a result, I think the formula exists all over the country, and I think as young people, you should do everything you possibly can, and it has to start with your parents at home. I think the discipline, the attitude, the love, the feeding that you have for them will reflect in the same attitude and feeding that you'll have for older people.
The impact of ageism in our society is individually and socially devastating. In a society in which built-in obsolescence is the accepted rule, people are similarly valued less and excluded from participation in the society as they become older. Attitudes toward the old, both by the young and consequently by the old themselves, are negative and damaging to an aging person's feelings about himself. In addition, as a society, we are losing some of our most basic human values in our rejection of the elderly. Most of us have a half-conscious fear that one day we will find ourselves old, that what we will be then has little to do with what we are now. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Aging is one part of the continuous life cycle. It is shaped by the individual's past, his childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Like earlier periods in life, aging brings new situations and new problems. Old age is neither inherently miserable nor inherently sublime. Like every stage of life, it has problems, joys, fears, and potentials. It calls for new adaptations. Older people are affected by the multitude of myths and stereotypes surrounding old age. Chronological age is a convenient but imprecise indicator of physical, mental, and emotional status. Old age is commonly viewed as a time of poor health, mental deterioration, and loneliness, a time of hopelessness. Science denies that any of these is necessarily a part of old age. Research has altered the view of aging as much as atomic energy has changed the horizons of industry. As new concepts become accepted, old age may cease to be the dreaded time of life and instead become a more satisfying reward for successful living. The adjustments many older Americans face when they retire are as drastic as any they have ever faced in their lives. Consider for a moment the adjustments an older person would need to make if his income was cut at least in half. Leisure time replaced the hours he worked. The regularity of his work no longer existed. His association with co-workers ended. He no longer had his work to occupy his mind. Many of today's older people have successfully made the adjustments associated with retirement. Many others have not. To help ease this sometimes difficult adjustment, younger persons can offer their friendship, warmth, and companionship. What are the needs of the elderly? Perhaps we should begin by ascertaining what the elderly think their needs are and what they want for themselves. A story is told of an elderly woman who, when asked this question, replied,
"We need what every human being needs, enough money to meet our expenses, to be able to pay the doctor when we are sick, a place to live, something to do, and someone to do it for, and someone who cares."
The basic needs and wants of the aged are no different from those of any other group. The old require and deserve assistance because they do not have the same capacity or opportunity younger people have in trying to satisfy these needs. But in considering the aged, we must remember that there are wide variations in who they are, what they're like, and how they want to live their lives. There is no one solution to the needs of the aged because there is no single old age problem. We have to consider individuals, and we have to consider individual approaches applicable to individual circumstances. The older American is different in only one respect from all other Americans. He is older. He has more years behind him. He may have special needs because of those years. So may we all when the years of our life accumulate. To talk of old age in America is to talk of two aspects, the inside and the outside, the internal feelings and the external realities of what happens to our bodies and how we can fit into the world around us. It is important for the old as well as the young to understand both aspects, which of course influence each other. One of the most important necessities of life is proper health and nutrition. But for some older Americans who live alone, maintaining good health and proper nutrition can be difficult. It is often hard for older people because they're often frail and many are poverty-stricken. A sense of alienation or deep feeling of loneliness may well make food unappetizing. Meals on Wheels has become a well-known method of bringing good nutritional food to persons who are homebound. In many instances where volunteers are used, it has been found that volunteers that stay to visit during the meal helps produce a healthier atmosphere for the homebound person. So much more than food is delivered in a program such as this. The symbol of caring, which accompanies such a service, is often as nourishing to the older person as the food itself. There are also several nutrition centers in the New Orleans area for those elderly who are fully mobile and wish a good nutritional meal. They provide and serve hot meals in a group setting where conversation and companionship can be the seasoning, which makes food even more appetizing. Employment plays varying roles in the lives of older Americans. For many, it is a principal source of income. For some, it subsidizes their Social Security benefits, which sometimes are not enough. Still, for others, it provides the therapy of usefulness, belonging, and well-being. If the problem of employment of older Americans is to be dealt with adequately, we must understand not only their varying needs for employment, but also the many obstacles and difficulties standing in their way. Our society cannot afford to let the talents and energies of the elderly go to waste. A more positive outlook is needed on the part of those serving older persons and on the part of the older persons themselves. Greater effort also is needed to help those older people who simply want something to do. The elderly, like everyone in our society, depend upon the ability to travel for acquiring the basic necessities of food, shelter, and clothing, as well as medical care. The ability to travel is also necessary for one's participation in spiritual, cultural, recreational, and other social activities. It has become increasingly difficult and costly for older persons to use public transportation. Not only do some have difficulty getting on and off, but the distance to the stop and the rise in fares have made it one of the most serious problems after health and income. Younger people with cars can help by sharing their transportation with older people. The issue of housing for older people is far more than simply providing a roof over their heads. The place where they live is often profoundly connected with who one is and how one expresses this sense of self. A suitable place to live is a necessity for the older American who wants to live a useful and independent life. They all want to live like the rest of us, in a home, their own if possible, if not, a place that they can call home. For many, retirement complexes offer a viable alternative for their needs. Most welcome a young, happy face willing to offer assistance in any capacity. But for some 30% of the older population, the housing is substandard, and the people very isolated from the outside world. Those who are well-aged, that is, those who can travel and get around on their own, can reach out and make social contacts in a variety of ways. Those who are homebound depend on the telephone and on others reaching out to them. Some elderly people who live alone suffer from isolation and from fear that something will happen to them and no one will know, or perhaps that no one will come to their aid. The New Orleans Council on Aging estimates that there are about 10,000 people in the city who need help because they're totally isolated. But the council says it reaches only about 3,500 of them. One reason for this is their isolation. Old people living alone, with little food and less money, don't often keep close track of the world around them. If remedies are to be found for such loneliness, it is necessary to seek a more accepting attitude toward our elders and a feeling that they are entitled to a meaningful kinship and loyalty. As a student volunteer, you can help the isolated and lonely older person. Visiting is one way of combating isolation of many of the aged. Small services such as letter writing and reading to someone whose vision is poor or is blind, helping to arouse and maintain interest in the outside world. All these provide an opportunity for the acquiring and renewing of social contacts. You can get involved with the elderly through the Council on Aging, church groups, and civic organizations. Most of the aged want to hold on to whatever they have and want to remain active participants in group affairs, any participation being preferable to idleness and indifference. As a volunteer, you can be of great service to those older persons, whether it's getting them to and from the centers or being there with them playing cards, games, or just talking with them, being a friend. Your time will be appreciated. The gift of time, enough time to do something for someone else, something for which no payment is expected, is precious indeed. Most older Americans appreciate this and are willing to accept open-heartedly a young person's help. Perhaps your life needs somebody, a foster grandparent maybe. Think about it. Because several hundred older people would like to be a foster grandparent. Volunteering can be just as rewarding for the older person. There are many healthy and active elderly people who would love to extend a helping hand, giving their time and wisdom acquired in a lifetime of experience. Older persons are a valuable resource in our community. Get in touch with an older citizen. His knowledge and insight could help you to grow and mature into a much more meaningful person. Homemakers programs sponsored by the New Orleans Council on Aging need volunteer services for the older persons who temporarily need assistance with home and personal care, including minor repairs, yard work, meal preparation, house cleaning, and doing neighborhood errands such as the marketing, taking the laundry to the laundromat, or the clothes to the cleaners. This form of home aid bolsters the older person's convictions that they matter and that someone is interested in them. A slower pace may be required when helping an older person. It demands from the younger generation an extra fund of patience, sensitivity, flexibility, and forbearance in order to break through the wall of isolation with which the older person is surrounded or which he surrounds himself. Problems large and small confront the elderly. They are easy targets for crime in the streets and in their homes. Often because of loneliness, confusion, hearing and visual difficulties, or helplessness, they are the most prime victims of crime and dishonesty.
The most frequently committed offense against an elderly person is that of burglary, and following that would be robbery, like simple robbery or armed robbery. I can state that positively that perhaps half of the 330 simple robberies committed against the elderly were committed by people 16 years and under.
Aging is an issue in human development that can be shared by all of us. We will all become older, but we will not all be affected by the aging process in the same way. Because the physical changes that accompany the aging process are viewed in negative ways, aging is often seen as signaling deterioration rather than as a further development. Physical changes are inevitable, but their impact on functioning is relative to one's ability to accommodate those changes. Whereas our physical being is at its prime in the early part of our lives, our psychological and intellectual being may continue to grow throughout our entire lifespan. It is true that many people stop growing in many ways at an early stage, but the modes of highly creative and productive people give us a vision of what can be. After all, Picasso reigned over the world of art at the ripe old age of 90. Winston Churchill's whole place of historical greatness in politics and government was earned after 65. Benjamin Franklin invented bifocal eyeglasses at the age of 78. Living at whatever age you are should be a search for self, the discovery and enchantment of those things that are most truly and profoundly you. When this is true, there is no age at which it is too late to grow. The sense of continuity of past with present and future, so important in understanding life's meaning, is possible only through communication between old and young. It is important to all of us to begin to change our negative attitudes about aging. We must view growing older as a necessary component of the total process of growth and development. We owe it to ourselves and to our elders to restore the dignity to being old, so that we may live all of our years as fully as possible. We must remember that today's elderly are not an homogeneous group. The character of the older population covers the broadest spectrum of needs, talents, problems, capacities, and abilities. We must not lose sight of these differences, which not only pose special problems, but offer unique opportunities.
Each of us is going to grow old, and the prospect of that event in many instances is not very encouraging. Unless things change, many of us will be forced to retire at an age when we are still able and quite willing to go on working. Unless things change, many of us one day will be living on meager fixed incomes, forced to watch how we spend every penny, deprived of the freedom to which we had looked for so long. Unless things change, the constant companion of many of us one day will be loneliness, that invisible cancer that eats away at and kills the lives of so many older people. You, today's young people, have got to help the elderly organize, to become a strong, clear voice for those rights that are theirs. Through organization, other groups have fought the battle against discrimination and won. Through organization, the elderly, too, can battle against discrimination and win. And in this way, we'll find new ways to preserve the dignity, to use the experience and talent of one of America's most important natural resources, our older America.
Hopefully, young people will ask themselves how they can contribute to enriching the lives of older people today, and how they can help society to regard aging in a more positive fashion.
Time is the most valuable thing we can give to our old people. By simply being around them and cheering them up, and by spending some time with them, it gives them a sense of enjoyment.
I think we owe old people a lot of respect because they've given us a lot of their time, and they've taught us a lot of things, and I think that they're just like people as we are.
I think that old people are really easy to please because, you know, just a little bit of time if you spend with them, then they really enjoy it, and it's just a little bit of your time, and it means so much to them. I just think it would be really great for everybody to do whatever they can.
Old people have been around a lot longer than we have, and they have a lot to offer us. They've seen a lot more, and they can tell us about places they've been, things they've seen that we may never see. And if you just go and talk to them, it'll be enriching to you and to them. I've done some work with old people, and they're just, all you have to do is start them off, and they'll just explode. They're full of energy, and they're just looking forward to being with you.
Communities are made of people needing each other. The older American knows this better than most. He made your community. He asks only that he may continue to be a part of it, not just a statistic, but a vital human being contributing and participating in the society in which he lives.
I think as far as the younger people treating the elderly, I think most of us older people are not looking for any exceptional overdoing of attention. All we want to be is treated like human beings. Not that we're decrepit old human beings, but just almost as an equal, if we could be, because that is what I've enjoyed at Loyola, particularly the last 8 years, is the fact that students up there treated me like one of them, or treated me as their equals, not as being something that needed help or needed attention or anything of that nature. And that's what I appreciate the most up there.
The younger generation should be concerned about the problems of the aged, as are the aged themselves. For the patterns of today's solutions will determine in large part the status of today's young when the time comes for them to join the ranks of America's older citizen.